Hello everyone. I'm excited to be interviewing another distinguished guest on Careers Infinite's 5 Steps Ahead in the Balancing Act, planning a career and staying sane. We have with us today Dr. Karen Bluth. She is a teacher, a researcher, and a mindfulness practitioner. She has years of experience working with teens and young adults. Her work focuses on the roles that self-compassion and mindfulness play in promoting well-being in the youth. She's the author of the book, The Self-Compassion Workbook for Teens, Mindfulness and Compassion Skills to Overcome Self-Criticism and Embrace Who You Are. She also has many blog posts on her website, www.karenbluth.com. In fact, I noticed that a couple of questions that I have for today have already been answered on a couple of her blog posts. She frequently gives talks, conducts workshops, and teaches classes in self-compassion and mindfulness to youth and adults. In fact, that's how I met Karen. I was in one of her talks, and that left a huge impact on me. Ever since then, I always wanted to hear more from her, and today I have the opportunity of sharing her views on these questions with all of you. So let's talk to Karen already. Thank you so much for doing this interview, Karen.
Oh, it's great to be here and talk with you.
Thank you. So a small introduction about mindfulness and what you do, basically.
So I'm primarily a mindfulness and self-compassion researcher. So I do research on mindfulness and self-compassion interventions, mostly with youth, but not exclusively with youth. My main interest is around trying to find ways to help teens navigate the teen years, which can be very challenging, as we know. And particularly in the last 10 years or so, it seems like it's getting more and more challenging. And mental health, in particular with mental health, can be very challenging. So my hope is that some of these interventions will, teens can use them and young adults can use them, and to have an easier time in that period of life.
Right. You mentioned that this has become more of a problem in the recent years. What has caused that?
Yeah, we don't really know. We have some ideas. We think that perhaps social media has something to do with it. We don't know that for a fact. At least I don't know that we know that for a fact. But I think research in the next 5 years is really going to come out and determine that social media has a negative impact on mental health. Because primarily that when teens are on social media, in theory, you're connecting with other people, but actually a lot of times teens spend a lot of times in their room on social media and are lonely.
Yeah.
So loneliness is a really big factor.
Wow.
So I think, personally, I think social media has something to do with it. I also think that the amount of pressure that's on kids of this age, teens and young adults right now, is tremendous, and much more so than in previous years. So I think that also has something to do with it.
Wow. I have heard this about social media, where people think that they have a lot of friends, but they actually end up feeling lonely. And you just mentioned that loneliness is something that, that has become one of the reasons why they need mindfulness practice. So how do we overcome that?
Well, I think, one of the things we have to do is put our phones down, and rather than talk to friends via Snapchat or Instagram or whatever the latest social media is to actually meet people face to face. And what we know is that this is different. It's not the same kind of communication. So when we meet people face to face and we actually have a face-to-face conversation with them, and we just hang out with them, and we, whatever we're doing, whether we're adults or teens, it's not the same. It's significantly different than a phone conversation or communication via
Even if it's
social media.
a group that's talking through just computers.
Yeah, it's not the same. It's not the same. It's better than nothing, but it's quite a bit less than meeting face to face.
Okay. What is mindfulness, and why are we really talking about mindfulness now?
Yeah, so mindfulness is about noticing what is happening in the moment, being aware of what's going on in the moment, meaning your feelings, your thoughts, your physical sensations, and doing it with an attitude of curiosity and interest and not judging yourself or judging your experience. So, for example, you can um, be experiencing a certain amount of anxiety because you have a big project due the next day. So, you know, the anxiety, the project being due the next day brings a certain amount of anxiety, but then you being hard on yourself for not starting the project earlier or not engaging right now in the project the way you feel like you should creates even more anxiety. So, mindfulness is being aware of, you know, okay, I'm feeling a little anxiety, and not and just noticing what you're feeling, you know, without that judgment.
I can relate to that part about anxiety making things worse because I'm not able to act in the moment. But just being aware of that can make you calmer. Is that what it is?
So the awareness of it is the first step, because often what happens with our experience is that in our minds we tend to what I call spiraling out. So you're you know, something, let's say something challenging happened or is happening. What we tend to do often is in our minds go to the next step. Okay, so you know, this bad thing happens. Well, that means that you know, I'm not going to have my project due on time, and therefore I'm going to get in trouble with my boss, and then my boss is going to fire me, and then I'm not going to get another job because I have this, you know, being fired on my resume, and then I'm going to end up running out of my savings, and I'm going to end up on the streets, and I'm going to be eating out of garbage cans, and you know, we could just proliferate like that, and we often do. You know, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but we often proliferate in our minds worrying about what's going to happen. With mindfulness, what we can do is just notice what's happening in the moment. And when we notice what's happening in the moment, it kind of makes allows us to pause and stop that mental proliferation about what if, you know, that escalating.
Right. I've noticed that out of personal experience that you talked about spiraling towards the future, like what this could lead to this, and so, you know, like a final outcome. But it often happens even into the past. Like
Yeah,
this
absolutely.
happened because of this, and that happened because of something else, and it can often get us caught up in a cycle that just does not stop, and it probably leads to somewhere in the distant past. And if that had not happened, maybe I'm not in this position today. So would that also have the same kind of impact?
Yeah, absolutely. So we can spiral out in both ways. We can spiral out to the future or spiral out to the past. And so when you spiral out to the past, it's, you know, we call it ruminating. You know, oh, if only I hadn't said that. That was such a stupid comment. Why did I do that? Why did I say that? You know, I'm such an idiot. You know, and just, you know, if I hadn't said that, then, you know, maybe I would have whatever. You know, I'd be in a better position today. And, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So we can ruminate about something that's happened in the past. And, and we know that rumination is linked to depression.
Right.
So when you ruminate a lot, people who tend to ruminate a lot can become depressed, or more likely to become depressed.
Okay. Wow. So in young adults or in youth, say in the 16 to 25 age group, what are the common issues that they face, and what kind of support does mindfulness extend to them?
Yeah, so issues are things like, first of all, getting into college, you know, grades, keeping up grades, getting into college, which doesn't just involve grades, but involves, you know, all kinds of extracurricular activities and having everything on your resume that you're supposed to have on your resume in order to get into a good college. And for a lot of the kids that I deal with, a lot of the teens, there's tremendous pressure to have the right things in in line in order to get the right to get into their college of choice. And then as you get older, of course, keeping your grades up in college and getting everything done in college that you're supposed to get done, and then looking to the future and, what do I need to have, again, on my resume in order to get a good job or to get into graduate school or to, whatever the next step is. So, so this age group right now is under a lot of pressure, and I think the pressure comes from different places. But what we know is that suicide rates are increasing, mental health rates are declining, and they need a lot of help. So mindfulness and self-compassion practices. Mindfulness teaches us to be aware in the moment and notice what's going on, and self-compassion allows us to be kind to ourselves and not to beat ourselves up. So it teaches tools so that we don't beat ourselves up when we're struggling.
The point about self-compassion brings me to the question of where does self-compassion end and where does self-pity begin?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a part of self-compassion is common humanity. So it's understanding that everybody else is going through what you're going through. So whether it's anxiety or depression or stress or whatever, these are emotions that everybody experiences, and it's part of being human and being alive on this planet. So self-pity is about poor me, I'm struggling, it's very self-indulgent. Self-compassion, because of the common humanity piece, is the understanding that, well, everybody's going through what I'm going through at some point or another. Maybe not right this second, but everybody struggles with sadness at some time, times, or loneliness, or being hurt. I mean, this is part of the human condition.
Right.
So it's that understanding that keeps self-compassion different than self-pity.
I have mostly noticed that, I don't know if it is an understanding or just an acknowledgement that other people go through similar issues, but it always ends up with the thought that my issue is bigger than everybody else's, or this is different for these many reasons, and that's why it's much more difficult to handle than other people's problems. I often come across that. So how does the understanding come?
So how does it get? Well, we teach courses in self-compassion.
Okay.
We teach courses, and we teach courses to adults, and we've adopted the adult course for teens. Okay. And so, in fact, I was teaching it this morning.
Okay.
And in fact, I was teaching the common humanity. It was a big part of what we were teaching this morning. And so we do certain exercises that make, there was a teen class this morning, that make the teens realize that, oh, I'm not alone. Everybody else here has also been bullied at some point in their lives. Or everybody else here also gets into fights with their parents. Or everybody else here also has done something that they feel ashamed of, So, we do it in a kind of playful way, and then we talk about it. But, so we do that in our courses, so people realize. And it's really quite eye-opening when teens do this, because they often really don't have a sense that, in fact, everybody else goes through what they go through, that they're not alone.
Yeah, I can imagine when adults do this, it should be that much more difficult for teens who do not have the exposure that adults do. But yeah, and in a way, it's good that they get these courses when they're teens, because that's going to help them in the future. Unlike most of us who have missed that opportunity.
Yeah, well, that's the goal. I mean, that's why we're trying to reach teens. So it's a hard time. It's a really hard time, and so we want to plant the seed that, you know what, it's possible to look at this differently. It's possible to not be hard on yourself, or as hard on yourself, and it doesn't mean you're letting yourself off the hook. Often people have, when we talk about self-compassion, they have this thought that, oh, self-compassion means, I'm gonna be easy on myself, or I'm gonna let myself off the hook, or I'm going to, let myself, not motivate myself, but that's not what it is, In fact, research shows that people who are more self-compassionate are actually more motivated to get things done that they want to get done, because they know they're not going to beat themselves up if they fail. So they're more likely to take risks.
And succeed.
Yeah. So, yeah, they don't, they're not going to be so hard on themselves if they mess up, or, say, okay, well, I'll try again.
That's great. Yeah, that should be the attitude.
Yeah, so we also know that people with self-compassion are more resilient.
Nice. So moving on to the next question, how long has the concept of mindfulness and self-compassion existed? Is it relatively new?
Mindfulness has been around forever, for thousands of years in Buddhism, and so it's been around for literally thousands of years. It's moved into Western culture in the late 60s, early 70s, and really moved into the mainstream maybe early 80s, early 1980s.
Okay.
It's been around for a while. Self-compassion is actually, it's really part of mindfulness. Mindfulness is in self-compassion, and self-compassion is in mindfulness. But self-compassion as is integral to mindfulness, but it actually developed as a construct that we measure and that we have researched in as of 2003.
Okay.
And Kristen Neff at University of Texas, Austin, defined it for research purposes and created the scale, self-compassion scale. And so that's when the research on self-compassion began.
Yeah, let's see. So what does your research involve in mindfulness?
So my research right now is around mindful self-compassion. So it's a program that was created by Kristen Neff and Chris Germer for adults, which has a foundation of mindfulness, but the focus is on self-compassion. So again, we adapted it for teens, and so my research right now is on teaching that program, teaching the teen program to teens, and looking at how they do before and after and follow-up. And we're looking at different populations of teens. So we have one study where we're looking at teens with some depressive symptoms. I have a grant that's under review for teens who are transgender. We're looking at some other populations also, teens with eating disorders.
Okay.
And also, I also do some work with adults also, looking at mindful self-compassion as the adult program, and looking at also various subpopulations of adults.
Okay. So does socioeconomic background also have like significant impact?
So we don't know yet. We don't know that yet. So we haven't, as far as I know, I don't think anyone's measured that in teens. I'm kind of reviewing the literature in my mind. And offhand, I don't know if anyone's done that with adults. It's possible. I'm just off the top of my head. Nothing's coming up.
Okay.
But it is something to explore for certain.
Right.
Certainly.
So you mentioned that you do follow-up as part of your research to see how teens are doing. So in what way do you think the teens are doing better after the course?
Yeah, so what we see at the end of the course is that things like anxiety and depression and stress have decreased somewhat.
Nice. Okay.
And positive things like life satisfaction or happiness have increased a little bit. We also noticed that at 3-month follow-up, or actually first a 6-week follow-up, some of those outcomes have stayed the same, some have declined somewhat, and some have increased a little bit. And we just haven't, we've really just done some preliminary research on that, so I'm hoping that we're doing more, and I'm hoping that other people will do more as well.
Okay.
I hear from people all over the world right now that are interested in testing this program in various different populations.
Okay.
You know, some are chronic illness populations, and so that's what I'm hoping, is that other people will take it and use it and see how it works for their populations and modify it. If, you know, I would imagine it needs to be modified for certain cultures.
Definitely.
Yeah.
We come across that a number of suicides are being reported in the youth population these days. We did talk about social media, and so we do notice that, as you mentioned, children are under a lot of stress these days. So in that adolescent years, there's an increased predisposition to suicides.
Mm-hmm.
So how does mindfulness prevent that? How can we stop children from getting into such bizarre thoughts?
So self-compassion in particular is, we think, can be effective for helping to prevent some of this.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that self-compassion really teaches teens that we emphasize is, number one, that I already talked about, the common humanity piece, that you're not alone. So often teens feel like they're the only ones who feel unworthy, inadequate, you know, like the biggest jerk that walked on this earth, you know? And so just the understanding that, oh my goodness, other people are going through this, you know? And so in our course we also talk about the adolescent brain and how it's changing, and how, and why, and the reason that as a teen you feel these extremes of emotions are because of brain changes that are happening in your brain, and it's not your fault.
Okay.
You know, it's not that you're going crazy, it's that your brain is changing. So we talk about that. We also talk about what to do when you're feeling, you know, when you're feeling really down, you know, and you're really hurting, how you can be there for yourself, you know, that you can actually do these specific tools and they actually make you feel better. You know, you can treat yourself kindly. So one thing that we always bring out in all our self-compassion classes is that, in fact, 80% of us treat our friends better than we treat ourselves, particularly in times when our friend is having a hard time. We'll be nice to our friend, we'll be kind to our friend, we'll say nice things to them, we'll take them out for lunch or for coffee or whatever, you know. We don't do that for ourselves. We're not kind to ourselves, you know. We don't say nice things to ourselves when we've had a hard day. We say mean things to ourselves, you know. 80% of us do that. So just, you know, bringing out some of this this data, you know, helps people to realize, or even just the realization that, oh my goodness, I'm so nice to my friends, but I'm so not nice to myself, is really eye-opening for people. Really, really eye-opening. And so they say, well, if I can be nice to my friends, certainly I can be nice to myself, right? Yeah, you can. And we're just out of the habit. So we have to get in the habit. And in order to get in the habit, you have to practice. So basically that's what we tell them.
Are teens open to talking about their feelings in general? Do they interact and open up?
Yeah, you know, it varies a lot from group to group, from teen to teen. Some, yes, very readily. It depends on their maturity level. As we know, of course, teens are going to vary tremendously from age 12 to 19 to 20. I mean, it's a huge developmental difference. And also, from one 17-year-old to another 17-year-old is going to be very different. So, yes, some of them right away will open up. Others, most of them, I think, take a little bit of time to open up. And it takes a little time for them to warm up, but they do warm up when they do open up.
Okay. So do you have any kind of interaction with the family as well? And do you get to know how the child or the teen is in the family?
Sometimes, and it varies. Usually we have, before the class starts, we have an orientation for families. so we can get to know the families a little bit. Often we have emails that go back and forth,
Okay.
checking in to see, just if a parent has questions, we'll have emails that go back and forth about that. Sometimes we have a group for parents, so a class for parents in the evening, just to kind of orient them
Okay. Parents
of the teens that we're working with.
Okay. Okay. How do parents or any caregiver keep kind of watch on their children to just see if everything's going on okay, and how do they notice if the child needs help?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So if we do a kind of a little bit of a screening ahead of time before our classes, because if there are teens that are, for example, suicidal, if they're actively suicidal, we wouldn't want them in class. I think it's they need to be in some other more clinical setting. If they maybe have had some suicidal ideation in the past but are currently under the watch of a therapist, we would let them in the class and have and just keep close ties with the parents. And so how would a parent know? What we've heard from parents are, my child is much more calm than they've ever been. They're not nearly as anxious. They don't seem as stressed.
Okay.
Also I want to say that a big part of how this works is that the teens have to practice. They have to do the practices.
Yeah.
So because otherwise, it'll be great while the class is going on, but then
Right.
once the class is over, they'll just,
It's just gone.
yeah, it's gone. So so they have to do the practices. So we do have audio recordings that we send to them.
Okay. So, and you also said you have a follow-up, so you would be following up with these students?
So it depends. So the follow-up is a research follow-up.
Okay.
So it depends. So right now in our research study, we do meet once a month for 6 months, and with the group, and do some practices. It would be great if we could do that more with everyone. But it's an issue, of course, of logistics and finances and all of that.
Right. But they would be equipped to do this independently, right?
Yes.
After the course, they will
Yes.
be able to. Okay.
Mhm.
That's nice. Is there anything that you would like to share with the public with regards to mindfulness and self-compassion?
Yeah, I just think that my mission is to really get this out there to teens who can really use it, and young adults who can really use it and can benefit. So I guess the only thing I'd like to say is that if there's a teen or young adult struggling out there with mental health problems, and mental health problems could just be stress, anxiety, or a parent of a child who's really struggling, that there are tools. There are tools, or for an adult who's struggling, there are tools, and that this stuff really works.
Right.
It really works. It's really helpful.
Okay. Are there any online resources? I know there's your website, and there's a lot of write-up there.
Yeah. So there's another website which is kind of there's a couple websites. So one is Kristen Neff's website, and she again is the pioneer in this in the self-compassion movement. Her website is www.selfcompassion.org. I think self-compassion is hyphenated there.
Okay.
And then another website is the other co-developer of the adult program, and that's Chris Germer, and his website is www.chrisgermer.com. And then a third website is the website for the program, for the Mindful Self-Compassion program, and that's www.centerformsc. I think it's .org. Might be .com.
Okay, we could dig that up.
Okay, Center for MSc. Oh,
Okay. Thank you so much for patiently answering all these questions. And,
oh, it's my pleasure.
I'm sure people who are listening in are really happy to hear all this and would probably read a little more and be more self-aware.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks. This was fun.